Loads of us would love to shoot on film for either our filmmaking or photography, but find that the rising costs are putting it further and further out of reach for either our personal projects or for our clients. That's where film emulators like Dehancer can come in to provide a budget-friendly alternative to shooting on film with features for precise colour grading. In this video, I'm going to show you how I use Dehancer Pro inside Adobe Premiere to grade a fashion film and how close it can get you to the film look. This is part one of my Dehancer 3-part series. I'm in Adobe Premiere for video today, with Lightroom for photography and the iPhone iOS app coming up next. Dehancer reached out to me not that long ago and asked me to give an honest review of their Dehancer Pro Film Emulation plugin. They haven't told me what to say or I wouldn't agree to do it, so I'll be giving you my actual thoughts as we go. If you'd like to cut to the chase and use Dehancer for yourself, you can get 10% off all Dehancer products and plans with the code AVA-10. That includes the iPhone app as well, and there's a link in the description. It's available as a plugin in a range of different software, including DaVinci Resolve, Premiere, etc. Some background if you don't know who I am. I've been working as a cinematographer for over 14 years, as well as shooting stills alongside that. These days, I like to go by the broader term visual artist, as I work across both of these mediums. I also host the podcast Art vs. the Algorithm, where I talk to filmmakers, photographers, and artists about their work and how it intersects with technology. I've worked alongside some great colorists using film emulation tools throughout my career, and I've also used these tools myself, especially in photography. But I'm coming to this review from a cinematographer's perspective rather than a pure colorist's one. And with that, I have a confession. Color theory and color, for me, has always been the most difficult part of my job. I think that's why I've produced a lot of black and white work throughout my career, and also why I've relied on working with some amazing colorists who have skills and knowledge that go far beyond mine. So for this video, I've reached out to my professional colorist friend, Filipe Fernandes, who has experience in working with both digital and film. We've worked together on several projects, and he's kindly agreed to answer some questions that I have as we go. And you can find out more about him in the description and see some of his work. I know you work on both film and digital projects. What is it about the film look that clients want so much on their digital projects?
Most people, when they shoot their films, they want the audience to be as close as possible to the story. The film texture is a way of being close to that story. It's the same when we see a photograph that's been done on film. There's something about the quality, the texture, the way the images feel when they're projected that it makes you feel closer and there's more depth.
If you know my work, you'll know that I specialise in shooting people. So I decided to organise a shoot and reached out to a fantastic Lisbon-based model called Olga, and she kindly agreed to collaborate with me, and you can find out her details and see her Instagram in the description. I also shot on the Fuji GFX100ii and used their lenses. You can watch the final fashion film that we made right at the end of this video. That's enough context, let's dive into this review and work on this grade. First, I'll download the Dehancer plugin for Premiere from their website, install it, and open Premiere. I'll speed this bit up. Once the plugin is installed, I need to download the camera profiles and films into Dehancer. The setup was a little glitchy when I was doing this. I had to restart Premiere several times, but then it suddenly started working. In terms of workflow, I'm using Lumetri on each individual clip to do basic color correction and exposure work. I'm using Dehancer on an adjustment layer to set the overall project look. Things like film stock, grain, halation, etc. You'll see when we get into it. That way, every shot passes through the same film treatment, but I can still fine tune each clip to match. Firstly, I need to convert my footage to Rec 709 so that I can use it in Dehancer. Dehancer doesn't yet have a camera profile specifically for the F-Log2C profile on the GFX100ii, so I first needed to convert my footage with a Fuji look in Lumetri, then select Rec 709 in Dehancer as my source. I'll make my basic color correction and exposure changes in Lumetri now. During this input stage, you can make input corrections such as exposure, temperature, and tint compensation, as well as enabling defringing to help with chromatic aberrations that may interfere with Dehancer's effects. I'm going to select that and leave the rest as they are. Next is probably the most exciting part. In the film menu, I can choose from over 60 film profiles that Dehancer claim have been accurately sampled from real-world film stocks. The options include both photography and filmmaking stocks, and this is great as I like the fact I can apply photography looks to moving images. Essentially, it's giving the impression that I could have shot on a film stock that wouldn't have even been possible to shoot video on, as well as on film that's no longer made or accessible. Straight away, my footage looks pretty great with a lot of these profiles, and it's almost fooling me that I shot on film. I'm no scientist, obviously, so I'm basing my comparison with actual film on whether I'm buying the look and feel of it. On the short form content that I tend to work on, I found that that's a pretty sufficient measure when using film plugins and film grain emulators. I'm going to go with Agfa Color 100, a German-based pastel-like photography film made between the 1970s and the 1990s, which feels quite fitting for my European fashion film shot in Lisbon, or as the Portuguese say, Lisboa. How do film emulators like Dehancer compare to grading actual film scans?
It's always different grading a film scan from grading a digital image, but that's exactly why film emulators like Dehancer make a lot of sense, helping you get to that style.
You can read in detail how Dehancer makes their film profiles on their website, and the process seems very well thought out, which is quite reassuring when using these profiles. Push-pull's a cool setting that mimics the way each film's colour and contrast look changes depending on how much light it receives during the exposure. It's just like when you push or pull film, if you've had any experience of doing that. I'm going to leave this at 0 as I like the look of the film as it is. Next, I'm going to jump down to the Expand tool, which provides manual control for black and white points in the output colour space and therefore the contrast. Dehancer recommends to adjust this straight after choosing the film profile to fit into the dynamic range of my timeline colour space. To avoid clipping in the waveform, I'm going to nudge this down a touch. A lot of Dehancer's film profiles lack contrast without some adjustment, so I'm going to adjust this to the level that I like it. I'm going to switch the colour mode profile to Luma only, so it only affects the luminance and leaves the colour saturation unaffected, as I'll deal with this later. Next, I'm going to adjust the overall vignette to mimic lens vignetting, which is going to be the start of breaking down my digital image. Dehancer recommends that you lock this in at the start of the grade as it affects the exposure and increases the contrast between the edge and the centre of the frame. I'm going to just nudge the exposure down a little and reduce the feathering. I've already applied some specific vignettes to certain shots in Lumetri, so I'm doing this as one way to very subtly marry the whole film together visually. There's going to be some other ways too. Back to the top in the Film Developer tool, I can make my own development recipe based on tools traditionally used at the film development stage. Contrast Boost controls developer contrast, which is an important change. I'll increase this to 18. I'll leave gamma correction as it is, and lower colour separation to 75 to reduce the saturation of the most intense colours. I'm going to increase colour boost to 20 to raise overall saturation in a gentle way. This tool prevents colour clipping by ensuring all colours will remain inside the colour gamut. This is great, as when I was less experienced and unable to see colour clipping, I made some serious mistakes clipping some of my work. I'm going to move to the film compression tool now to fine-tune the way the highlights are distributed to more closely resemble film. When shooting on negative film, highlight clipping can occur much later than on digital, and this is usually one area where film emulators can fall short when using digital footage. If your digital camera does not have the highlight detail to mimic film accurately, then it'll start to become obvious. I've seen a few times this happen, and it can make it look like a digital image is sitting beneath a sort of film grain layer. And this is something that I want to avoid whilst I'm doing this. This is one reason why shooting on film can be more forgiving and controversially easier in some ways, because you've got more latitude to save an overexposed shot. I'm going to move impact to 35 to adjust the amount the highlights are pushed towards the midtones, and then I'm going to leave white point and tonal range as they are. I'm going to reduce colour density to 40 to control the colour intensity of the compressed range. Essentially, I'm lowering the saturation in the highlights. Negative film tends to noticeably lose saturation in the highlights, whereas positive slide film or digital remain more vibrant as highlight clipping occurs earlier. Now onto the print or print medium selection tool. This is like optical printing, the last stage in analog production. Basically, it's how my now graded negative would look when printed onto either positive film or photographic paper for either a release print or other purposes. Each print medium has its own contrast curve, color bias, and latitude, so it affects the overall image. It's kind of like the toasting stage after you've made a sandwich. The sandwich is ready to eat as is, but the toasting stage further changes the sandwich's look, texture, warmth, and flavor, which could reflect the digital image in our grading pipeline here. Maybe this analogy is a little bit of a stretch, but you get the picture. For me, this tool shows Dehancer's attention to detail and knowledge of the post-production film process. It wasn't something that I was expecting, and I'm really glad to see it. First, I'm going to select the analog range limiter checkbox. This limits the black and white points to reflect the uncorrected values on the reference prints that Dehancer used for each print medium. I'm going to select Kodak 2383 print film to begin, and I'll reduce the target white to minus 0.3 to warm the image slightly. I'll reduce the exposure to minus 0.4 and the tonal contrast to minus 8, whilst keeping my eye on both as they affect each other. I'll reduce colour density to minus 20, which lowers the saturation of significant colours to a greater degree, and I'll leave saturation at 100. Are you ever involved in printing film or digital projects back to film stock? And if so, what's the key to getting that workflow right?
The key in getting things right when you're shooting back to film is having a workflow with either a LUT for film or an emulator that's doing the correct job. And what the LUT is doing on the digital environment is to replace exactly what the printing would do. When you remove this tool and you go into printing, then you'll get a similar result. You need testing, you need to do this several times, and you need to allow for adjustments.
I'm not going to use the color head tool in this video, but these are a set of color correction tools based on those inside photo enlargers. These are devices that optically print to positive film and they're not too dissimilar in method to printer lights. Now onto the part you've probably all been waiting for, which is film grain. Maybe you're wondering why it's so far down this list when surely film grain is the most important part of film emulation, when in reality it's just one ingredient that goes into the cocktail of making this. Dehancer doesn't just overlay a film grain onto the shot, it reconstructs the shot from the ground up based on your adjustments. You need to have a powerful computer to play your previews back at full resolution without rendering, so I've dropped mine down to half for this. As a shot on a GFX100ii medium format sensor, which is slightly larger than full frame 35mm, I'm going to select the 65mm ISO 250 as my base. Then to change the settings on a granular level, pun intended, I'm going to select custom straight after. To increase the perceived sensitivity of my film, I'm going to increase the size of the grain to 8, as this video will mostly be viewed on small devices, so a slight adjustment will allow it to be more visible. I'll also increase the amount to 30 for the same reason, and then I'm going to leave the other settings at their default values. Now onto halation. Each profile has two versions, a standard version, and then one with the anti-halation layer removed, also known as no remjet. This has more pronounced halation. If you're not sure what halation is in this context, it's the film emulsion effect that appears as red-orange halos around bright light sources, contrasting edges, or specular highlights. It can also produce a red glare in the mid-tones too. So staying on theme, I'm going to choose the 65mm profile with no remjet to spice things up a bit. To see the halation effect clearly, I'm going to select mask mode to give me a preview, which is really useful. I want to reduce the size of the halo slightly, so I'll drop local diffusion to 10 and global diffusion to 15 to reduce the degree of glare across the whole image. I'm going to leave the rest of the parameters at default and then disable mask mode so I'm back to my original image. The bloom tool is up next, and it goes hand in hand with halation as both of these effects coexist on film and influence each other. I want to use both at the same time. Bloom emulates the way light disperses on the boundaries of contrasting image areas. I'll choose 65/70mm, then custom. Again, I'll select mask mode to help me see the changes that I'm making. I'm going to leave the highlights at default. This determines the threshold of brightness for bloom to appear. I'm going to increase source limiter to 30 and reduce the details to 50 so that the effect is more global across the entire image, and drop the saturation slightly to 90 before unchecking mask mode. When grading real film, do you usually try to remove the dust and scratches? And conversely, do you ever have to add that back into digital footage to achieve a film look?
A lot of people want to remove the damage from film scans because they believe it interferes with your experience, your connection with the film. Ironically, you can add that to a very clean image because it helps you to recreate the feeling that was to watch an analog print back in the days.
I like the fact that Dehancer have included a film damage option with 4 profiles and custom parameters to add even more life into the image. You have the option to go into minute detail in the custom settings, but for the sake of this review, I'll select 65/70mm, and I like Dehancer's defaults, so I'm going to stick with those this time. As I'm moving down this list and getting an understanding of how in-depth the tools within Dehancer are, I'm really intrigued about the Film Breath tool. This tool introduces accidental changes to the exposure, contrast, and colour from frame to frame. Dehancer claims that this greatly improves the viewer's experience of the analog feeling, and this is exactly what we're going for here. This is because we're introducing random and uncontrolled elements which help to give film its unique quality. I'm going to start by selecting a film format profile. And you guessed it, I'm going to go for 65/70mm again. I'm going to go to custom and reduce the tonal contrast and colour significantly down to 3, so that the fluctuations are very subtle and work on the viewer's subconscious. If you push this too far, the shadows can flicker noticeably and become a distraction. Gate weave is the mechanical swinging of film as it moves through the frame window in a film camera, and this can help to breathe even more life into a film image. I'm going to select the default 65/70mm again. If I come back later and I decide I want to quickly adjust the effect of Dehancer, Output allows me to do this by controlling all of the engaged effects with a single slider. So that's it for my grade and my look at Dehancer Pro. Clearly, Dehancer has put a lot of effort into reflecting the real-world film processes and the creative choices that you have throughout that workflow. They've focused on the smallest details and it's reflective of their knowledge on the subject. They've tried to demystify the film look and break it down into its component parts, and I really like that. I like how it reflected the analog process, which allows for some unexpected things to occur. This is part of the magic and fear of working and shooting with film. Luckily, Dehancer allows you to undo what you did, and it has custom tools that allow you to go beyond analog processes and get extremely specific. There's a lot to learn if you want to have a true understanding of how each element works within Dehancer. But if you do go to that level, you'll gain real creative control over your grade and film emulation. It's great for those who love an analog approach with the control of digital. Overall, using Dehancer on this project is the closest that I've ever got to converting a digital image into a convincing film-like one. However, one thing it can't do is reflect the real-world experience of shooting with film. Shooting on film gives space for happy accidents as well as total disasters. That changes work practices, the costs lock people in, and it forces us to be more discerning when shooting film stills and video, which I find makes me better at my job, a better photographer and a better cinematographer. If you'd like to try Dehancer for yourself, remember you can get 10% off all products and plans, including the Apple iPhone app. Just use the code AVA-10 when purchasing, and you can follow the link in the description. If you found this video helpful, please support my channel by giving this video a like, subscribing, and I've got the rest of this series coming out very soon. You can see more of my work at willpreisner.com and on Instagram at willpreisner, where you can give me a follow, and the links to all of that is in the description as well. Huge thanks to Olga for a fantastic modeling work and to Filipe for his professional colorist insights. I've linked to both of them in the description, so be sure to check out their work. Thanks again for watching, and as promised, here is the completed fashion film. Let me know what you think of it in the comments.